Okay, that's a way to jumpstart us. As you can see, the heart and soul of DOC, Mitch is so passionate, and it's wonderful to be working with someone who understands the profession so well and can partner with us. I'd like to do, after that welcome, I just want to do a little bit of house cleaning for the meeting today and set the agenda. First, so again, I'm Kerry Keel. I'm one of the co-directors of this conference along with Dr. Cherniack, and I'll introduce Dr. Cherniack. I think we brought together some of the best scientists and the best industry and labor and management. We have a diverse group here this is a very rich group, and I am so looking forward to the conversation today. What we really hope to do is present some topics to this group, sort of tee up the conversation if you're golfers, if you're a golfer. But really, it's to present some cutting-edge research and sort of set the stage for what we hope will be a future direction of research and what are the needs that need to take place. I want to recognize our sponsors for this meeting. Notice there was no cost to attend this meeting, which is amazing. Thank you to our sponsors, which one? Dr. Steve Shea, if you could stand. Steve is the new director of the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences, and Dr. Shea is the leader of really the total worker health in Oregon. So thank you, Steve, for your sponsorship and support. I'd like to recognize the director of the Total Worker Health Center, Ken Anger, Dr. Anger. And they're contributing in a big way for the support of bringing our speakers and food, and so thank you for that, Ken. The Yukon group, again, if everyone from the Total Worker Health Center from Yukon can stand, along with Dr. Cherniack, everyone. Awesome. Everyone from NIOSH. NIOSH is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, who fund our Total Worker Health Center, which you're going to learn what total worker health means today. But there's only 4 centers, the Total Worker Health Centers in the United States. And NIOSH has funded Harvard, the New England group, Iowa, and us. And Oregon, thanks to Dr. Anger and his team, and I'm one of them along with Dr. Leslie Hammer. Dr. Hammer is the co-director, wrote this incredible grant. We got funded, so we are one of 4 sites in the country. So I would like the NIOSH, those that fund us, and also that will be presenting today, the NIOSH group stand. The NIOSH from Cincinnati and from Morgantown, Pennsylvania. I would like to recognize a leader in research who we're honored to have here, Dr. John Violante. Dr. B. Cops has the longest law enforcement study, and great to have you here, John. Look forward to your presentation. Dr. Vila, Brian Vila, is a good friend and sleep expert. Dr. Vila from Washington State University will be presenting today. You guys, Paula, you rose. Dr. Charlotte Fritz. Charlotte is the co-director of this conference and, again, leading researcher. Margaret Braun Margaret's the research coordinator, formerly at Oregon DOC and now with the OYA. Okay? And again, industry, thank you, union labor management. We look forward to a great day. What we're going to do is, if you have any questions, Carol and Adriana are sort of our project coordinators. They'll direct you. Refreshments here. We're going to let the speakers go and then allow about 5 to 10 minutes for questions. So we won't ask questions during the presentation, but at the end, we'll allow 5 to 10 minutes for questions, and we'll have a mic. So to our national audience, this is a live stream, so participants are following both the speakers as well as the slides, but they will not have the opportunity to have interaction. So it's not a web conference, but it's a live stream. Okay? So again, we're going to start with Dr. Martin Cherniack, and I'd like, Martin, if you'd like to come up. Dr. Cherniack is an occupational physician for a few years, 30? Yes. Again, started when he was 12. But has spent a lot of time both as a teacher, research clinician, and has spent years at NIOSH. Most importantly, he's a leading researcher in corrections. So again, we're honored to co-partner with Dr. Cherniack and his group, and he's going to give sort of the overview and summary, sort of state of the union of corrections. Thank you, Dr. Cherniack.
Well, I'm pleased to be here, and I can't see the national group, and unfortunately this is not an interactive webcast, so you're just going to have to listen. You know, I have the advantage of having been involved with Carrie and Maz Nogahiri, who's here from UConn as well, and doing the planning, and we can see how all of this fits together. And I'm pretty confident within 2 or 3 hours, everyone here is going to see how all of this fits together. But I am going to spend a little bit of time going through some of these logos, only because probably the terms and the names come up, and then, you know, once you've identified the function, you can forget it. Just to give a little bit of sense of how some of this came about, and then I want to get into a bulk of very short talk. A number of us are part of what's called CPH News, Center for Promotion of Health in New England Workplace. It was one of the original Total Worker Health Centers, and as you can see in the title, it says Total Worker Health. And it's not because we're discriminating against National Institute of Justice or NIH or any other function, but the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health took a very progressive and an advanced role about 10 years ago in trying to promote research and interventions which would combine health promotion, health protection, chronic disease management with more traditional workplace organization, occupational health, physical hazards, and so forth. And it turned out in our case, and actually in the case of Oregon, we have 2 of the 4 national centers here, as what was said, we got involved with corrections. And the involvement in Connecticut and I'll say Massachusetts, because CPH New is a joint activity. You've actually got the experience here in Oregon with Portland State and Oregon Health Sciences University. So this is no surprise. We have a little bit more geographic separation, but between Connecticut and Massachusetts, we've had a very close working relationship with UMass Lowell, University of Connecticut's Health Center, and the university. So we're also a consortium. And actually, this whole meeting, in many ways, is about consortia, because I think what's going to become clear, and certainly we can see the outlines, that if we think of this room and who's listening, we have professionals, we've got administrators, we've got labor and management professionals, we have university professionals, we've got people who've been active in the field in sort of outreach and teaching, and we've got federal institutions, both intramurally, by intramurally I mean doing their own internal projects and also funding external projects at universities and other groups. And I think all of us realize that for these types of integrated activities, broad activities, to really succeed, we have to really marshal our resources and work very commonly across grounds. And actually, it's happening right now. And this is interesting, one of the areas where it seems to be happening most prominently. Now we got involved with corrections, I'll just say, not out of intent. It was essentially a challenge. And I've got colleagues from Connecticut here, and they may remember some of the beginning. It was a challenge, actually, from in Connecticut we have a supervisors union, captain and lieutenants, and they basically said, look, you know, you're interested in this, then it was called work life, total worker health, integrating work and health. You could do it in a state agency. You could go to brown bags, you could give people pedometers, you could have nice meetings and surveys. But why don't you take on something that's real, difficult, not so easy, with their real needs? And it took us about a year because we didn't know corrections. and before we decided we could go ahead. So, and it's been, and I think some of you may have the same experience. We've actually found, despite all the barriers and cultural issues, that we're doing better and finding much more effectiveness working in corrections than we are in the private sector and large companies. You know, everyone will say corrections is so much more difficult and the culture is difficult and you have all these barriers, but actually we see much more interest, willingness, and continuity between management and workforce. You know, sometimes when you're in the private sector and you're dealing with global corporations, you get the sense that people believe there's a fundamental difference in the genetic pool of who works and who manages, and the two can never cross. And there's this line of sort of intellect and background that you can never traverse, and that's clearly not the case here. There's an overarching culture and set of interests. So I use this term for, you know, this is my 95-5 intervention, integration, participatory action. I don't think this will have a life beyond this slide. But the idea is that the research which we need to do as academic professionals at this stage is really intervention research, which is different than a lot of the observational work that's been done in the past. We have to be ready to act and to measure how effective it is in terms of our programs and activities. The integration is something people struggle with. It's a little more obvious in some ways in corrections where there are so many life issues that come out. Work and home is a much clearer overlap than it is in a lot of other areas of work. You also have a work situation which is in many ways very fixed and not so flexible. So the challenges are there. I think sometimes the concept of integration, you know, why would you do health promotion, exercise, diet, smoking cessation, and talk about work or work organization? Why are they on the same page? It's an issue we struggle with very much. NIOSH struggles with very much with total worker health. Oddly, in corrections, it's clearer, and it makes intuitive sense to people. So I want to talk a little bit about what I see as our goals today, and really kind of, I have to lay out the goals. I have to say something at the end of the day in terms of what happens. So please bear some sympathy in mind for that. But I think what we would like to do is, the one thing I want to say about this is this is not something out of the blue. This is not going to be a meeting about what do we do next, or how do we start, I should say, because there's already a lot of there's a good deal of maturity in terms of starting, and one of the things that I think we see as our goals here is we really want to move on what's a shared understanding and broaden it into a national community. And again, take the total worker health approach and integrate it, introduce it to corrections. It's already happening. And, you know, in a lot of ways, the way this meeting came about is a good representation. We've done some work with our colleagues in Oregon in terms of some common surveys, and we realized we had common projects. And we realized we had a common funding agency, which was NIOSH. And we realized we had some commonality in the programs we were trying and adapting. And this was all happening on its own. And then Mazen put a lot of effort into this in the fall and the winter. We had a work stress and health meeting where there was an informal discussion about this. And then we kind of really put out a call to professionals, academics, people in corrections, the federal institutes, and said, is there a common interest, and should we do something next? Now, this meeting is a result of that, but there was a common interest. This was not and I want to thank everyone who participated in putting this on, because this is a voluntary effort. This is, you know, this is pay your own way. You know, invite them, you know, let them show their credit cards and show up. And it has, it's been remarkably effective, which is to say that this is a very good chance that this will really evolve because it's kind of hit all the right notes. Some of the things we want to be discussing today and thinking about is our next steps. You know, we don't want to do a summary paper or an article just to have it in a journal. We really would like this to be the equivalent of kind of a stakeholders meeting, so that we can go to the federal institutes and say, this is the work agenda, this is what we'd like to see, this is the work we think should be done, and these are some of the approaches. We we have to think about how to do it at this meeting, but certainly the preliminaries are that we have the basis for a consortium which can operate nationally. We've done it, on a dime, but the motivations are very strong, and the collaborations between, again, corrections professionals, academic professionals, Federal Institute and health professionals are all there. And it's really a question of the next format. I think if we just have a meeting every year and we show up, this is going to be a failure, and I'm pretty confident that's not going to happen, that there's going to be considerably more. And then I think we have to talk about what kind of work we think should be done. Should it be individual projects, state-based, multi-center? Those are all things that are open discussion. And what I think is, it's an interesting thing in academia. You're always in some competition with your colleagues because funds are always limited. But I think we also have a strong reason and a motivation to work as colleagues, and that's been what's really been dominating so far. So I want to just say that hazardous duty research has a basis to it. And John Violanti was identified. Probably most of you know his work in BCOPS, looking at cardiovascular disease, stress, in police. As the group has moved, there's been work with NIOSH in this regard, and they've been doing work transitioned in the same way we all are to interventions and prevention, but also working now with corrections. And what I want to say about this work and why it's a good example and why I think it's been very influential in terms of many investigators in the field is that the Buffalo group has really reached out over a wide variety of cross-disciplinary professionals in many different areas, everything from basic pathophysiology to work stress, post-traumatic stress, work psychology, cardiovascular physiology. And it's a good example of the kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration that can be done with a fair amount of interest, enthusiasm, a good cohort, and good leadership, and good scientific leadership. And I think that's the we don't need to go looking for examples of what's an effective approach. We've got some very good ones. Kale had talked a bit about flame, and I want to mention that because there's been some excellent work done in firefighters in Massachusetts and particularly here in Oregon. And these are intervention programs. Interestingly, the common themes are a good deal of prevention and very team-based. And that, I think, is kind of central, that I think for intention and accident or discovery, many of these activities in hazardous duty services have really merged towards a participatory team-based design rather than a top-down administrative design. We often are dealing in a milieu where there have been many top-down solutions and programs, and they simply, it's not that the ideas or the interventions are wrong. The interventions actually are probably pretty much the same no matter where they come from. But it's, we haven't had many new ideas. But we do have new ways of introducing things, setting them up, and evaluating them. And then I want to say in our own experience, which is more recent in New England, we've been working on participatory forms, really on the process of working kind of from the officer level up. And I just want to say a few things generally about the field, and some of this is not going to surprise you. But some of the things which we've seen observationally and others have described, that the adverse health patterns which are remarkable in corrections and exceed national norms appear very early in employment. In fact, one of the projects we have, half of our project is a program for mentoring of new recruits, which the COs are actually directing. But it's because the adverse health patterns appear so early. There's been a lot of interest in the deaths and suicides, again, not much characterized. And we have this whole issue about cardiovascular disease risk and this juxtaposition of inactivity and intense activity. And we know that these are hazards from other industries. We know it's true in police work and firefighting and long-distance truck driving, where you've got people who are sedentary and then you've got sudden action. And then the ways that you need to keep yourself alert. So this is, I didn't have a lot of data, but I just wanted to present this because it tells you a little bit about the cohorts we're looking at in Connecticut. Now, we've been, as well as interventions, we've been making observations. And just to explain this slide, the blue is pre-hypertension in the corrections groups we've been studying. The green is hypertension. And the red, brown, and the purple are the national norms. And what you can see is that before the age of 35, we're seeing levels of hypertension and pre-hypertension which vastly exceed national norms. And what's interesting about it is it presents so early and it doesn't change so much. So if we look at national norms, what we see is that hypertension is an age-related incline. And in fact, that's actually changing a lot of the guidelines about management of hypertension. Some of it's seen as an age phenomena rather than necessarily a pure disease. But there's something going on very different in corrections, which is this very early presentation which stays there. Now, this is just some longitudinal work, and I think it maybe presents some of the problems. So this is some data from a cohort from 2018, another cross-section in 2013, and on the far right, people who've been followed for 6 years now. And I think what you see here is really interesting, presenting also some of the limitations of health promotion and also some of the challenges of the work. So if we look at things like BMI, compartmental body fat, as we're measuring, we see that these are actually pretty stable. And in fact, in some ways, you can even argue on an age basis with people who've been engaged in the project for some time, it's even a bit better. But then when we look at high blood pressure, and this would also be true for binge drinking and stress measures, they've been going up. And we can speculate on all kinds of reasons why they're going up. We know that there's been budget cuts every year. We know that there are significant staffing limitations. We know that the inmate population is larger. We know in our state anyways, it's very hard to hire new officers. It's much easier to extend overtime because there's all these state restrictions. As soon as a governor would propose that we expand the workforce, there's going to be retribution from the public media. And so we have all these issues, and I think what we also see is that we can't just pick out isolated health promotion issues and say you're going to lose weight. I mean, we do have weight loss programs. They work very well. They work very well in this group. There's no smoking in prison, so no, we do find that people are actually doing a lot of chewing tobacco, but that's a different story. But we've got these really basic patterns, and they're very much tied into each other. There's no one single issue. In fact, people understand that they're interrelated. So I wanted to talk about just a few concepts, and then I'm going to finish up here. Some of the things which we kind of realize in terms of integration. One is that, again, this division of personal life and work life is just not sensible or useful. And many people realize, the idea that you stop on the way before you get home, and that's the way it's supposed to be, doesn't work. It comes out in a variety of different ways. And the other thing, I wanted to say something about return on investment and productivity. It's not, I don't mean in the statement that we can't do it, and it's not important and a driver that there are significant injuries and costs, and both group health and workers' compensation expenses. But I also think the issue we really need to stress is this is not a productivity issue which we're going to measure in terms of more inmates per officer or lower pay for officers or farming this out to a private company that's going to be able to do all of this with far better handling of inmates versus staff. This is really the fundamental issue has to be about work and disease and prevention and health. And as much as we're trying to have cost control, we have to make this foremost. And I think we have to do this with the entire workforce. Corrections is just a little more salient. But we can't take the argument that if you can't justify this in the crassest short-term units, then you haven't shown ROI. We're talking about quality of work and quality of life and people's survival. And I think what we've also seen in a lot of research in this area is some things sort of take care of themselves. If you can make some changes in interventions, a lot of things change. But they're incremental, and they need to be piece by piece. There are some things that are very limiting. I mean, we know the budget and staffing are highly confined. This is an area of work where life cycle change and research doesn't fit in. We don't really have an older workforce component in corrections. People retire, and so the kind of adjustments that we have are there, but they're not in the same way that they are when we're in manufacturing and we find our average age in New England maybe is 60. It's very important with corrections workforces that benefits are protected, and that's almost always going to be the first question. that health benefits, retirement benefits, pay benefits, things that are one earned are going to be preserved. And also the fundamental nature, which for those of us who are not directly involved sometimes forget, the importance of security is always being the first priority, and that's always going to trump, and that's always going to be a consideration. Some of the things that are characteristic and also strengths, there's high level of unionization, and labor organizations have been strong advocates in our experience. That also means there's an experience with the quality life, health committees, safety committees, emergency events types of committees, crisis committees. There's a fairly large experience with different kinds of team and voluntary action, and that can be worked with. And also, really, Mitch Morrow made the point very well. We see an officer to supervisor continuum. I mean, yes, there's hierarchy, there's rank, there's reporting, there's discipline, but there's a common stream, and that ends up being quite central. In Connecticut, we've been trying to make use of a participatory process, which for some of you here who are going to take part in the workshops we're going to work through. This is just to give you an idea of, this is in print, fortunately, so we don't have to talk it all through, but the way we've been doing our participatory intervention projects, one of the major areas, we're comparing a labor management approach called Kaizen to a pure participatory officer-led program called a design team. But at every stage, what we found is we had to put a great deal of effort into what we call a study-wide steering committee, which is an oversight group that ultimately represents labor and management and has final decisions, but has to work interactively with the design teams and the Kaizen teams. And finally, you can see we also do something else, which is that as much as we'd like to think that everything can be done internally, it can't. So when we're trying to work in the state level, we have to bring in other parts of the state. They're not involved directly in the study teams, but they are involved as a committee. So if we need special budgeting and we don't want to go through a 2-year capital cycle and so forth, we can go to our administrative services and get a large promise of funds that can be spent, a small portion of which actually will be invested, but nevertheless, it's there. So these are the structures we follow. Not everyone has to follow these. We can talk about them in detail at a later point. And we're going to go through an exercise this afternoon. I know people on the webcast are not going to be able to take part, but this is on what we call the Idea Scorecard, which we've developed both in corrections and for general industry and public sector. And this is a, can I say a 7-step program without giving up, conceding too much. But this is an interactive program which we've been finding has worked extremely well. We've been looking, for example, at issues such as inter-officer civility, indoor air quality. We're looking at health and nutrition right now. And it's a way of kind of organizing, a ground-level group to be sort of organizing its activities through a strategic process, which is not going to be unfamiliar to people. These have been used in management in different ways, but we've tried to develop an approach that can be used by a workforce itself. And we'll provide material. This is all in the public domain. And CPHNU has put all of these materials, workshops, toolkits, scripts, scenarios, surveys, surveys that can be done by a workforce itself. They're all in the public domain. We'll give the websites, and we'll hope that they get used and people find them useful. And finally, just the last slide, I want to just talk about the key concepts. Some things just we have to keep in mind throughout all of this. The physical and mental health norms of corrections workers are below national levels. This process of constant sedentary vigilance, shift work, extended hours, episodic reaction, stress, sleep, chronic musculoskeletal injury, social and family relations, these are all, they're not all, each one is not unique to corrections, but in combination, they're very specific and unique to corrections. We note that and everyone in corrections knows that the organizational culture is a tough nut, and it takes time, and it's not something you change in a 6-week intervention program. The environment in many ways makes the so-called culture of health inconceivable. This is not Google, I mean, that's all I can say. I mean, and we know in this particular time period, we have to be thinking about approaches, and this is more for the investigators, that are always intervention-based. And we have to, and part of what we'll talk about today is the ways that we can assess the success of our interventions, because it's a different metric in some parts than what we usually use. I think many people here, whether we call it team-based or participatory action research, have a very strong sense that this is an area where team-based approaches, peer-based approaches, participatory approaches work extremely well, and people take to it. The other thing is, mental health and suicides haunt corrections. They're not necessarily publicly recognized, but they are internally recognized to a remarkable extent. And there are some very good programs that have been developed in states and locally. We also, I think the general theme here is that corrections is kind of where police and fire maybe was a decade or two ago. That there hasn't been the same attention, but this is really kind of we're at this point in the last several years where our effort is to force this agenda. And as you know, you can't raise the question of why isn't this done. You simply have to set the pattern and do it, and then it gets done. And this is it. This is where this is the basis. One thing we also see is that there is this overlap in the values of labor and management. Despite all the contesting, fighting, arguing, finger pointing, there is a fundamental overlap and a shared interest. And then the last thing I just want to say is that this is not square one. This is not a meeting where we have to get together and say, what do we do next? We have this problem, how do we solve it? There's extremely, some very good work being done right now nationally involving officers, administrators, academics, federal sector. We were struck, I think all of us, with the fact that the work was there's some very effective work being done. We have to translate this into an effective agenda and a collaborative agenda which will be supported, publicized, financed, promoted, and advanced in terms of our collaborative efforts. But we don't have to invent something. There's been a lot of work that's been done through the invention process. So I'm done making the introduction. Hopefully I've covered this. I think today's discussions, I have the advantage of having seen all the slides. They're all going to fit. And I think this is a working meeting, and it's a delight to be here. Thank you.
There's going to be a lot of time for sharing and questions. Do you have any specific questions on overview summary of Dr. Cherniack right now?
Just one on the Martin, on this HTEC 2 participatory process. Is there a site or a place we can get a copy of that at least?
Yes.
I'd like to.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked today. Because we just got the current website up yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm really glad we didn't meet yesterday.
So can we post that for
We'll make sure that's
all
available.
participants?
Yeah. Somebody will tell us where to post that.
Thank you. A couple people I didn't recognize early. Dr. Mary Storr from Washington State University. Mary, thank you for, I haven't met you personally yet, so great, and be presenting this afternoon. And Dr. Marie Garcia from the National Institutes of Justice, who I will be introducing as our second keynote here in just a few minutes. And again, and Dr. Leslie Hammer, who's the co-director of our Total Worker Health Center. Leslie, thanks. Safe travels back from Israel.